You are standing on a hillside at dusk. The wind is cold. The grass under your feet is old, older than any language you've ever heard spoken. And somewhere down in the valley below you, a river runs black under a sky that is beginning to fill with stars. You can hear them before you see them. Hooves, voices, a horn, low and mournful, carried up the slope, on a wind that smells of wood smoke and horse sweat and something older still, something like iron and rain. You turn, and what you see is not one people, it is many. A tall figure crowned in silver, eyes like lamps, walking with the impossible smoothness of something that does not really belong to time. Beside him, a squat man in mail, beard braided into knots, an axe on his shoulder that looks like it has opinions. Behind them, a shorter man, hairy-footed, barefoot in the wet grass, chewing something. And further back, half hidden in the tree line, a shape that is bent and grey, and watching you with the patient hunger of something that was not made to love. You are looking at Middle-earth, and every single one of those shapes is a different species, not a different culture, not a different tribe, a different kind of being entirely, with a different origin, a different lifespan, a different soul, and in some cases a different maker. Because here's the thing about Tolkien's world that most people, even the ones who've read the books 3 times, don't quite hold in their heads all at once. It is not a fantasy setting. It is a functioning evolutionary and theological ecosystem. Everything came from somewhere. Everything was made by someone. And every race, from the highest elf lord to the lowest cave crawler, sits on a family tree so specific and so strange that if you actually mapped it out, it would look less like a myth and more like a peer-reviewed taxonomy written by a philologist who was quietly losing his mind in the best possible way. So the question is a simple one. Who is actually walking around Middle-earth? Where did they come from? And why does it matter? The answer isn't what you think. Because when most people talk about the races of Middle-earth, they mean the ones on the movie poster. Elves, dwarves, hobbits, men, orcs. Wizards, maybe, if they're feeling generous. That's 6. That's what most fans could name at a dinner party. And that's roughly a third of what's actually out there. The real list is longer, stranger, older. It includes beings that predate the sun, beings that were sung into existence before the world had a shape, beings that are technically not from Middle-earth at all, but from a place beyond the sea that most mortals will never see, and a few from a place beyond even that, which not even the elves can name without going quiet. There are shepherds of trees who remember when the mountains were young. There are things in the deep water that the Fellowship crossed a bridge over and did not look down at because looking down was not an option a sane person chose. There are horrors so old that Sauron himself, the Dark Lord, the one whose name we spend 3 books afraid of, was a servant, a middle manager, a promoted apprentice. Let's start at the top. And by top, I mean the beginning, the actual beginning. Before the world had continents, before it had oceans, before it had a shape you'd recognize on any map, there was one being. Tolkien calls him Eru Ilúvatar, which translates roughly to the One, the Father of all. He is not a character in the story. He is the reason there is a story. He exists outside the world the way a novelist exists outside a novel. And everything that happens in Middle-earth happens because he permitted it, sang it, or chose not to prevent it. And out of his thought, before anything else, came the Ainur, are the first race, if you want to call them a race, though they are less a species and more a chorus. Angelic beings, pure spirit, made before the world was made, and given the task of singing it into existence through a great music, a music so vast that when one of them, the most gifted of them, decided to sing a different tune, the whole song bent around him and cracked. That one was called Melkor. Later, he would be called Morgoth, the black enemy of the world, and he is the reason anything in Middle-earth is broken. Every wound in the world traces back, eventually to him. The Ainur split into 2 ranks. The greater ones, the Valar, came down into the world and shaped it, 14 of them. And they are essentially gods, though Tolkien is very careful never to quite say that word. They raise mountains. They kindle stars. One of them, Yavanna, plants the first seeds and grows the 2 great trees whose light will later become the sun and the moon. Another, Orle, builds. He is a craftsman, a smith, and he will become important in about 10 minutes when we get to the Dwarves, because he cannot wait for the proper timing, and he does something he is not supposed to do. Below the Valar are the Maiar, lesser spirits, Same substance, smaller flame. There are thousands of them. Most are unnamed, but some names you already know. Gandalf is a Maiar. So is Saruman. So is Radagast. So are the two blue wizards who wandered east and were never heard from again. The Balrog in Moria, the thing of shadow and flame that drags Gandalf into the dark. Also a Maiar, corrupted, fallen, twisted by Morgoth into something monstrous, but originally once a being of the same order as the wizard who fought it. And Sauron himself, the great villain of the age, is a Maiar. He was Ole's apprentice, a smith, a craftsman. That is why he is so good at making rings. Let that sink in for a second. The greatest evil of the Third Age is, in cosmic terms, a mid-level angel with a grudge. Now, let's talk about the ones who came next. Because after the world was shaped and the lamps were lit and the trees were grown, Eru made his children. Two kindreds, made not by the Valar, but by the One himself and no one else. These are the firstborn and the followers, the elves and men. The elves woke first by a lake called Cuivienen under stars, because the sun had not yet risen. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine being one of the first thinking creatures on a world that has never known daylight. You open your eyes and there is only starlight, and the sound of water, and the strange awareness that you are aware. The first elves are said to have simply lain there for a long time, looking up, learning the constellations before they learned each other's faces. Their first word in the oldest Elvish tongue was reportedly a word for star. Elves are immortal, not in the sense that they cannot die. They can by violence or by grief, but they do not age, and their spirits are bound to the world itself. When an elf's body is killed, his spirit goes west to the halls of Mandos, and may eventually be re-embodied. They cannot leave the world the way men can. They are the world, in a sense, its beauty, and its long, slow sadness. And they split. Of course they split, because that's what happens to any people given enough time and enough disagreement. Some elves went west when the Valar summoned them. Some stayed. Of the ones who went, some turned back part way. Of the ones who arrived, some later rebelled and came back to Middle-earth in exile. And which branch your favorite character comes from explains almost everything about them. You end up with a taxonomy. The Vanyar, the golden-haired elves who stayed in the west and are essentially never seen. The Noldor, the deep thinkers, the smiths, the exiles, the ones whose story drives the whole First Age. The Teleri, the sea people, the singers, and then the ones who never went at all, the Sindar and the Sylvan. Elves and the Avari, the unwilling, who stayed in the east and were largely forgotten. Legolas is Sindar. Galadriel is Noldor. Elrond is a bit of everything, because his father was half-elven and his mother was descended from a Maiar, which is exactly the kind of complicated genealogy this world produces if you scratch it. Then men woke. Later, in the east at the first rising of the sun. And here is where Tolkien does something quietly heartbreaking. The elves call men the followers, and they also call them, in their oldest songs, the guests. Because men are not bound to the world. Men die, and when they die, their spirits leave the world entirely. And even the Valar do not know where they go. Not even Mandos. Eru gave men what Tolkien called the gift of men, which is death, though he is very careful to note that men, being men, have almost always experienced it as a curse. And men too split. The Edain, the ones who fought against Morgoth in the First Age, and were rewarded with the island of Numenor, became tall and long-lived, and eventually tragically arrogant, and their island was sunk beneath the sea in one of the most Atlantis-shaped catastrophes in any fictional world. Their survivors became the Dunedain, the men of the West, and from them came Aragorn. Then there are the middlemen, the Rohirrim among them. Horse lords descended from a people called the Eotheod, related distantly to the folk from whom the Hobbits also came. And there are the Easterlings and the Haradrim and the Variags of Khand, men who never turned against Morgoth or Sauron, who lived under different shadows, and whom Tolkien writes about with a complicated mixture of enmity and quiet sympathy, because he knew, having been in a trench in 1916, that the man on the other side of the line was still a man. Now, the Dwarves. Here is where the story gets a little bit illegal, because the Dwarves are not supposed to exist. Orle, the smith among the Valar, the one who shaped the mountains, and loved craftsmanship above all else, grew impatient waiting for the children of Eru to wake. So he made his own, secretly, in a hall under a mountain. He shaped 7 fathers of a new people, sturdy and stubborn, made to endure cold and dark and to love stone the way he loved it. And when Eru discovered this, he did not destroy them. He confronted Ole, who wept and offered to break them with his hammer, and the dwarves, seeing the hammer raised, cowered, which meant they were already alive, already thinking, already afraid. Eru accepted them, but he made them sleep deep in the stone until after the elves had woken, so that the firstborn would still be first. That is why dwarves are called the adopted children. They were not planned, they were forgiven. Keep that word in mind. It's going to matter when we get to the end of this, and it shows in everything about them. They are secretive. They are proud. They keep their true names hidden and use outer names for outsiders, so that even the names carved on their tombs are, in a sense, aliases. They believe that when they die, they go to halls that Ole built for them, separate from everyone else's afterlife, and that at the end of the world, they will help remake it. 7 clans, 7 fathers. Durin the Deathless, the eldest, whose line held Khazad-dûm, the greatest kingdom the dwarves ever built, and lost. Into a Balrog they dug too deep and woke. Here's where it gets interesting, because if you're keeping count, we now have Ainur, Valar, Maiar, Elves, men, and dwarves. That's 6. That's already more than the movie poster. If this is the kind of deep map you came here for, subscribe, because we are only halfway down the family tree, and we haven't touched Hobbits yet, and we haven't touched the ones Morgoth made, and we haven't touched the ones nobody made, the ones that just somehow were. Hobbits, halflings, the little people. Nobody, including Tolkien, is entirely sure what they are. In his own writings, he calls them a branch of men, a subspecies, small in stature, quiet-footed, unadventurous, who split off from the main line of humankind somewhere in the deep past and drifted west into the Shire. 3 breeds among them, the Harfoots and the Stores and the Falahides, who intermingled over centuries into the singular round-bellied, pipe-smoking people we know. But nobody knows why they became small. Nobody knows exactly when they diverged. The old chronicles of elves and men barely mention them, because for most of history, nobody thought they mattered, which is, of course, the whole point. The story of the Third Age turns on the fact that the 2 beings who carry the ring into Mordor are hobbits. Not kings, not wizards, not warriors. The smallest, most overlooked, most anonymous branch of the family tree. Tolkien, who taught language for a living and knew what a footnote looked like, made the footnotes the heroes. And then there are Ents, which is where the world gets truly strange. When Oleg made the dwarves in secret, Yavanna, who loved growing things, went to her husband and to Eru and said, essentially, if these stone lovers are going to wander the world with axes, my trees need protectors. So Eru granted her wish. Spirits went into the great trees and woke them. Shepherds of the forest, Ents. Enormous, slow, thoughtful, old beyond old. Speaking a language so ponderous that saying good morning takes an afternoon. Treebeard, the eldest we meet, is possibly the oldest living thing in Middle-earth by the time of the War of the Ring. Older than Elrond, older than Galadriel, older than most of the mountains he walks past. And there were Entwives once who wandered east to tend gardens rather than wild woods, and they were lost. And no Ent has seen an Entwife in thousands of years, and Treebeard, when he speaks of them, does so with a grief so quiet it barely registers as grief. And that is somehow worse. Now for the ones nobody wanted to make. Orcs, trolls, wargs, the bred things. Morgoth, we are told, cannot create life. Only Eru can create. Morgoth can only corrupt. So he took, according to some accounts, elves he had captured in the earliest days, before the sun rose, and he tortured them, bred them, deformed them across generations in his dungeons, until what came out the other side was orc, twisted elves, which is a thought so bleak that Tolkien himself, later in life, tried repeatedly to rewrite it, because if orcs are corrupted elves, it means every orc killed at Helm's Deep is, at some ancestral level, a murdered cousin. He tried making them corrupted men. He tried making them soulless constructs. He never landed on a final answer. And the ambiguity remains. And that ambiguity is, arguably, the truest thing about them. Trolls were made in mockery of Ents. Slow, huge, stone-like, and in the old accounts they turned to stone in daylight because Morgoth's imitation of Yavanna's craft was crude, and the sun undoes them. Later, Sauron bred a stronger sort, the Olog High, that could bear the light. Wargs are intelligent evil wolves, allied with orcs who ride them into battle. Dragons are perhaps the greatest of Morgoth's corrupted works, fire drakes and cold drakes and winged terrors. And Smaug, the one you know, was one of the last of them. A small footnote in the long catastrophe of the dragons. And beneath all of that, in the deep places, there are things that have no maker anyone remembers. Gandalf, walking the bridge in Moria, says it plainly. There are older and fouler things than orcs in the deep places of the world. He is talking about creatures that were not made by Morgoth, that were not made by anyone we know. The Watcher in the Water, the thing with the tentacles at the west gate of Moria, is one of them. Nameless, ancient, simply there. Ungoliant, the great spider from whom Shelob descended, may have come from the outer darkness beyond the world itself, a being of pure devouring hunger, who Morgoth once bargained with and barely escaped. The world has basements Tolkien never fully lit. And so you have it. The full census, or something close to it. Ainur, Valar, and Maiar, spirits of the beginning. Elves, the firstborn who woke to starlight. Men, the followers who die and go beyond the world. Dwarves, the forgiven made in secret. Hobbits, the overlooked. Ents, the shepherds. Eagles, who are possibly Maiar in feathered form, we're never quite told. Orcs and trolls and wargs and dragons, the wounded things, the corrupted things. And below them, older than any of them, the nameless things in the deep water that even a wizard will not describe. Go back to that hillside, the one where you started. Feel the wind again. Look down at that valley full of hooves and horns and firelight, and realize what you are actually looking at is not a battle, or a fellowship, or a story. It is a family reunion. A very large, very old, very broken family, whose members mostly do not know they are related, whose maker mostly does not intervene, whose long story is one of division and forgetting, and the occasional moment where a hobbit and a dwarf and an elf sit at the same table and decide, against all their history, to help each other. That is what Tolkien wrote, not a fantasy, a genealogy of longing, a map of who we might have been, and who we still, sometimes in our better moments, are. And if you want the next branch of that map, the video on screen goes deeper. The road, as any hobbit will tell you, is longer than it looks.